Hi everyone, this is Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot. I'm here with George Green, a great old friend of Camelot, someone I've interviewed in the past. Many people will know his interviews, fabulous other interviews, let me say. So if you're watching this, I encourage you to go back and watch the earlier George Green interviews. At the moment, we're at an event here in Prague, and we're going to be speaking, both of us, in fact, tomorrow. And it's really a delight to have you here, George, in person. We haven't seen each other in quite a while. George is a fabulous speaker, and he is someone who has been down the rabbit hole, let's say, well down the rabbit hole. And I'm actually going to ask you to go over some of those little incidents in your past to just illustrate for the people that aren't going to be familiar with you right off the bat what you've really been involved in and then where you've come to. And he's certainly a financial expert and is very good at assessing the status of where the financial system is now. He has had his own bank in the past, and he's also got a background in science. He's worked in, from what I understand, the aerospace industry, as well as the housing industry and more. So welcome, George Green, and thanks so much for doing this interview.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Great.
And all your listeners.
So will you tell them a little bit about your background, how you sort of stumbled on the UFO in the hangar? I think that's a great place to start.
Well, I was in the Air Force, and my first assignment out of tech school, they put me through a year of electronics. I had spent 2 years prior to electronics in the high school, so I was well familiar with everything. Well, Air Force, I was only 17, and I went down to the Air Force to join to get away from the family. That's what it was, basically. Anyway, Air Force sent me down to Biloxi, Mississippi, not Biloxi, but in Texas, to do basic training. Well, it lasted 2 weeks. They had taken all their tests. They decided they'd skip all the basic training, so they sent me to Illinois, and I went to school in electronics. In that was teaching me all about, radios, etc. But I already had that experience, so it was a nothing. So at the end of that was about 11 months. My first assignment was Edwards Air Force Base. Now, Edwards is located out in the Mojave Desert. Our runway out there was like 70 miles long. And Edwards was fun for me because it was the Air Force Research and Development Center, and it's located about 100 miles north of Los Angeles. Anyway, my first thing with my job was to do what they call the post-flight inspections on the airplanes. So I was working on all the latest of our research-developed vehicles, and one morning they sent me out, last week in August, I'll never forget it, and that was in 1958, they sent me out to do the post-flight inspection on the X-15. Now, the X-15 is nothing more than a rocket on skids. Now, what happened is it landed out there about 5 miles north of the base. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, and this is in August. They won't allow you to work out there when it's over 100 degrees, but, what do I know? I had a Jeep, and I had to put 25 miles a day on my Jeep to keep it. So anyway, here it is, 10 o'clock in the morning. I finished doing the X-15 inspection, and there had been a couple hangars out there I just hadn't been into. Now, it was cleared for top secret, so I could do anything I wanted to, so I just pulled into one of them, went inside the hangar, and there's a big round disc. I'm 10 feet away from it now. It looked really neat. It's something new, but I'd been working on a lot of strange-looking vehicles that we had. So anyway, I decided, hey, I'm just going to go back, and I checked in with my commander, and I said, when can I work on that round craft? And he said, you saw that? And I said, yeah. He said, well, that's an ion-powered craft designed by Sikorsky, the helicopter people. Now think about this, 1958, talking about ion-powered stuff. Anyway, I said, that's okay, when can I work on it? And he says, you can't, it's still a civilian project. And so I, let me off. I'm going back, and I happen to be friends with the base photographer. Now that's easy on Edwards because at that time there was only 800 airmen and 25,000 civilian contractors, to give you an idea. Anyway, I said, hey, he was the base photographer. I said, let me some pictures of that round craft. And he said, what did they tell you? And I said, I gave him this story, and he said, come on with me. Didn't say another word. Just grabbed me and we went back over to the photo lab, and he proceeded to show me pictures of the spacecraft, about 10 feet away from it, so I knew what it looked like. But the two dead aliens got my attention. I'm sitting here, they're similar to the ones that you see in the movie The Greys. Well, I was more than that, I was just upset because I had a top secret clearance. They could have told me the truth. So I went down and confronted my CO. And the first thing he did was set me down and debrief me on my top secret clearance. After he finished up that, my last few minutes was, when the government's ready to tell the truth about UFOs and ETs, they will. Until then, you're going to stick to your story. And he said, next weekend's going to be Armed Forces Day. We're going to open up the base. Anybody can come in here. They won't be able to go out to those hangars, but I'm going to put you on duty so in case somebody happened to see something out there with their glasses and stuff on it, we will be taken care of. And I said, fine. 30 days later, I was transferred off of the base to Tokyo International Airport, and to Tachikawa Air Force Base. The reason was I had worked on the F-104, the Starfighters, the jets, and that was one of the few in the country at that point, and they had a skirmish going on over there, and they figured that was a good place to put me. Well, I got over there, and the skirmish was over almost before it got stopped. But I'm stationed here at Tachikawa, didn't even have anything better, so I decided to go to Toshibashi University and study Japanese and some business. Now this is just a few years later. So anyway, I'm doing that, and I said, I've been in the service now about 2 years. I've been accepted to Colorado School of Mines, which is the #1 engineering school in the world. And I said, I'm going to get out of this crazy outfit. I had a 4-year. They agreed to stay in the service for 4 years. Well, but the 2 years were up. Well, I was a friend with Peter Dominic, our state senator, so I notified him that I want out of this thing to go to mines because everybody's trying to get into old mines, and I was admitted already. So anyway, rather than doing that, the Air Force transferred me down to Biloxi, Mississippi, and I made an instructor in electronics. That lasted 30 days. Then they grabbed me and then assigned me back to Chanute Air Force Base and cross-trained me into the Hound Dog nuclear missile. So for the next 2 years, I'm involved with the nuclear missiles and the nuclear program. Anyway, then I wanted to get out because I still admitted it, and I had my 4 years in, and in the Air Force, luckily, or whatever, they extended my career. And they put it past the 4 years, and I was reading the fine print in it, and I found a way, since I had over 4 years in, I was considered a career airman, so then I reapplied and I got out and I went to Colorado School of Mines, and that's how that happened. Anyway, from that point, of course I studied, at that point, geophysics and the world of supposedly science as such. Anyway, during this period of time, my dad happened to be the third largest meat packer in Denver, and we were processing animals and stuff, and what he was doing at that time, we were processing the animals for the government, providing the school lunch program. My dad needed a lot of help. He said, come on down and help me. This is the school break. And I went down there and he says, you can help. Now, I was the school runt, if you will look at it. I mean, I graduated from high school. I weighed 135 pounds when I joined the Air Force. I come out of the Air Force, I weighed 150, to give you an idea. Anyway, the game went on with my dad, but my dad was having trouble because in the meat business, we would go out and buy, to give you an idea, 100 loads of cattle. We had to pay for them in 24 hours. That's the packers and stockyards because we kill the animal. Well, when you get through killing the animal, then we process it, and then we process it for the government, and then I invoiced the government. But when we got paid was like 3 months. Well, if I got to pay for an animal, and then 3 months later I got it, takes enormous amounts of money. So my dad, because I'm really good with numbers, he put me down to the banks to borrow against my government receivables. So I would go to the bank. Now I got government paper, so it's kind of blue chip for the bank. They don't have to maintain reserves for it. The trouble is they have loan limits based on their deposits. Well, I became friends of the bankers, and they were always young, because I had a lot of friends with money in my dad's business. And during World War II, he was the only one providing meat. Everybody that came to him. So anyway, those games on. Anyway, I kept doing that, but I had borrowed all the money from the bank's limits on 17th Street in Denver, except for one. Anyway, one day I went over to one of the banks. Dan Sebastian was the president of it, and I said, I need to get more money. He says, go talk to my boss. And I said, who's that? And that was Marvin Davis. Marvin Davis was a billionaire at that point. So I went over to Marvin Davis's office, walked in there, and he said, "What are you here for?" And I said, "I need to borrow some money." And he says, "I don't loan money to Gentiles." And that was the end of that story. I got thrown out. So then I went on to another bank of mine, this is Colfax National Bank, and the banker president at that time was Dan Sebastian. And Dan says, "George, you're good with money. You have a lot of friends with money. Have them to put them in my bank, and we'll be able to loan you more money." And I said, "Let me look at your books." So I went over the books, and I found out, and I'm not talking with Dan, I says, "I got a solution for both of us. You're spending about 3% putting in full-page ads in the newspapers, offering to give away, a new television set or a radio if they put in a $10,000 deposit in the bank for 1 year." And I looked at that and I said, "Look, if they put in 10,000, they can loan out 10 times that. In other words, $100,000." And I said, "I got a better solution. Now you're paying about 3%. Why don't you pay me the 3%? I had nothing to do with the bank, and I'll get you all the money you needed." And Dan says, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'll get my friends, and don't worry about the rest of it." So what I did is I called my friends up on the phone. I wrote out a check to them for 2% of the $10,000, so the $200, and we loaded up the bank with $5 million. The bank then could loan out $50 million. And at that time, the banks were paying 5%. I gave you 2%. That was a 40% increase on your money with no risk. You owned the money, it's in your name, and theoretically it was insured by FDIC. That's a private corporation. Anyway, there was a no-risk deal. The bank, however, I'm looking at the books, they loaned out $50 million at 8%. $50 million, that was $4 million they made on a $150,000 investment with me. Mm-hmm. That to give you an idea. Now, because of the Federal Reserve requirements, they have to share that with the Federal Reserve, which is a private bank again. So now we're into the game of money playing big time, because there were two things. My friends that gave me the money were telling all their friends what a good deal it was. And so I had people come from all over the country sending money into my office. In fact, they made a mistake one day and they put an extra $1 million in my account, the Federal Reserve did. And they come into my office and demanded their money back. And I said, "Here," I signed the papers, and they gave me a gift, 16th century Siamese coins, for giving them back $1 million. I still have them. Anyway, it was fun. Anyway, the next thing happened is, because you were a loudmouth telling everybody about the money, Dan was too. He was telling all the other bankers. So I had bankers all over the country calling me. I had millions of dollars coming to my office every day, going in every direction. And I got into the position when one bank wanted to load up because they were going to sell it. So at the end of 1 year, when the certificate came up to renewal, if they didn't pay me the 3% again, I told them I got another bank that would do that because I had them. So what would happen, we'd move all the money, that 5%, out of the bank. And guess what happens? Either the Federal Reserve took over the bank or FDIC liquidated the bank and closed it out. So I became super powerful. I had nothing to do with it, but I could break banks. That I was brought into the attention and the guys that what they were, going on. What's this guy George Green doing? And I said, fine. Anyway, the Federal Reserve notified the state of Colorado to license me. And I said, for what? I said, I love exams. And what they said was, we got to get you a license for selling money. I said, no problem, give me the exam. I studied law and business when I was at the University of Illinois also. So I got involved with a lot of the things on it. Well, they didn't have such a thing. There is no exam for the money. So Peter Dominic, who was the state senator, was a friend of the family. I said, Pete, when you go back to D.C., get me the accounting book for the IMF and the World Bank. So what they did, I got it, and I have a copy of this stuff on it. I took a copy of the main page, which is the definition of money. Now, for your listeners, if they want one, just email me. I'll send them a copy. They don't have a definition. So what happened is, the state sitting here with me, they were frustrated because, hey, the government's telling them they got to license me, and they didn't know what to do. And I said, let's do something different. Let's consider money some kind of security. And of course, they wiped it. Oh, good. They said, but what you're doing, you have to be a principal. And of course, I said, bring it on. And at that point, they gave me all the information on it. I became a registered financial principal, a broker-dealer, and a securities underwriter of all securities. By reading all the documents, I said, oh my God, another license to steal. So what had happened is, I started to do this. So some of the people, my friends, wanted to go public. So Denver was the headquarters of all the dollar stocks. I don't know if you heard of the penny stock. Anyway, the people would come to, and I'd go, raise $100,000 or $200,000 in penny stocks. Now, one of the requirements as an underwriter, I have to maintain the market. Now, everybody out here loves gambling, so they buy stocks, right? So what happens, all the people were buying the stocks, but you have other brokers, and they only make money because they got new stocks. So all of a sudden, it's trading all over the place. Here's the problem. The stock market dropped 20% in one day. The stock had already gone up to like $10, to give you an idea. And I knew what the company was worth. I was the underwriter, and I had to maintain the market. And I said, wait a minute, I'm kind of exposing my whole family at this kind of thing. I don't know if I want to be responsible for this. So my fellow brokers in Denver, we got together because everybody was in the same position. We're all these putting stocks, all these gambling around here, but I'm not going to maintain the market. The following week, I shut my firm down. The following week, the Federal Reserve put 8 members on the floor of the exchange of the United States. They call them the plunge protection team. And you read about it in TAME. And their job is to keep the market going. So all I have to do is buy or sell 100 shares of stocks before closing. That determines the price of the 10 million shares out trading between all the brokers. What does that really mean? What is the stock market? It's a gambling casino.
Sure.
Well, meanwhile, during that same period, friends were coming to me from other industries for setting up pension funds. I got involved. The Federal Reserve finally got smart and sent a letter to every bank in the United States not to do business with me. So I moved all the money out of the banks into the savings loan industry. The savings loan was good. They gave me the same deal for a while. When I got out to California at U.S. Life Savings and Loan, and Jane Shaler was the head honcho there, and Jane says, you can help me. And I said, I went over their books, and I love to do that. Anyway, I said, I got a solution. I have to figure this out. All I'll do is I'll pull 1,000 of the mortgages, because they were long-term mortgages, people's houses and stuff. So they made a mortgage. They had all these accounts receivables, but every one of them was at a different mortgage rate, a different interest rate, and a payment in, and I couldn't determine how the hell really to get the valuation, so I felt comfortable to go public with it, because that was one of my responsibilities. So I flew back to New York. I had an office there at the time. And we got and had lunch at time, and one of the guys he says, I got a solution, we can both make money. I said, what's that? And he said, we'll insure them. We'll insure the mortgage, that package. They call them derivatives, derived off of. That's where they come from. So what happened, the guys up there picked it up on all kinds of things. So derivatives all of a sudden spread all out. They don't tell you what a derivative is because there are no assets. The assets are held by the issuing on there. And they started selling derivatives of derivatives, and they sold them to foreign countries, they sold them to people's pension funds, and what's happening is a lot of the derivatives controlled bonds and stuff of cities that have already gone broke. Now, when the stock market recently dropped, you guys all remember that, when they stopped the stock exchange totally and the government come in and rescued all the stock exchange, they paid everything off to all the brokers and everything, they got all their money back. This just happened. They also rescued what else? AIG, an insurance company, because they insure all that. And I'm explaining this all so you know what's happening. Well, meanwhile, I'm still playing the game. The S&Ls they were in trouble. So what happened is my friends went in and bought all the assets of the savings and loans, in other words, all the mortgages, and paid the government 30 cents on the dollar. American taxpayer picked up all the difference. And now you're running in a new game now where everything's going through the banks that we have on it. Now, at that time, because it was set up and I didn't like the way the Federal Reserve was playing the game, I started my own bank in Colorado. I had the state guarantee the deposits, but I didn't have the fractional reserve, the 10-to-1 ratio that the banks had. So I shut it down after a while. I spent more in overhead than I was taking in there just trading dollars with people. So I got out of that game. And then I went into real estate because I had friends that had a couple of restaurants in Denver, the Village Inn, Pancake House. Anyway, when I talked to Jim Mullen and Andy Anderson, that was the president of the stuff, I said, you guys got a good operation. I don't want to run your business, but I got a good deal for you. Why don't you find a place where you want to you're going to expand, you want to franchise it. You go ahead and find the property. I'll build the building, I'll buy the ground, and we'll lease it back to you on a 25-year lease, but I want an 8% return on whatever my capital again against 8% of your income. So it was a good deal for my investors because they were putting money into the bank. The 8%, got it to them tax-free because of the appreciation on the buildings. Well, here's where the problem became in big time. I would not financing the kitchen equipment on the inside of the building. I only financed building the building and buying the ground. So they went ahead and got all the financing. After about 5 years, they couldn't borrow any more money because they were so in debt to me, frankly, for all the buildings. I had them in, 22 states at that time. And so what happened is Buck Frederickson, that's their CEO, he's an attorney, they went public and they bought me out. That's exactly what happened. So then I ended up building shopping centers and office buildings and other things I looked at for a while.
Okay, now can we sort of fast forward, because at a certain point, not to go over too much of old ground, right? You did get an offer to be the finance chairman, was it?
Yeah, well, I'll explain that to you. Because of all this running around in my power, I was associated with a lot of guys that run Washington. Anyway, one weekend, one of the guys in one of the secret societies, he says, "Will you mind coming up to Aspen? We've got something we want to ask you." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "But it's a rough weekend for skiing. I'm going to bring my $2 with me." So they went up. I dropped them off to go skiing, and we went into the house. I'm walking into the place, and the world leaders were there. And I said, "What am I here for?" And they said, "We'd like you to be the finance chairman for the election of the next president of the United States." I said, "Why me?" And they said, "We owe you a favor." And then I said, the next question I said, "But I just started this $100 million project," which I did. And they said, "Don't worry about it, we'll put it on ice." And I said, "Who with?" And they said, "Well, you can do that." Now the next question is, what does a finance chairman do? Or no, who's going to be the next president?
Oh, right.
And they said, "Jimmy Carter." And I said, "Jimmy who?" And they say, "Well, he's the governor of the state of, down there. He's a one-term governor, and we're going to make him the next president." And I said, "Well, I got to think about this," because they said he was a Democrat. And I said, "I've been voting Republican then." And Paul Volcker said, "Don't worry about that, son. We control them both." Well, I knew that, but I got it in spades from him. It's the interesting combinations of stuff that happen. Anyway, I said, my next question is, what does a finance chairman do? And they said, "Well, you sit down with Ted." So I'm with Ted Kennedy. He was there. Ted and I were sitting here talking about it. They said, "George, you're really good with money. We want to send you out to the state Democratic functions to raise money for the party, and you're going to meet some real foxy ladies." And just then my daughter walks in. And Ted looks at her across the room and he says, "Wow, I got to go to bed with that." And I said, "No, you don't, Ted. That's my daughter and she's 14. And he says, "I don't care." I was livid. I got up. I didn't say another word. I got up and walked across the room. I talked to Pierre Trudeau and his wife. Pierre at that time was the Prime Minister of Canada, just to get my head level with Pierre. But then I'm looking down at his wife, and there's a cigar box full of white powder. I'm looking around the restroom. Something hit me at that time. If the world leaders had to resort to this, and I knew they did, but I don't want to be part of it. Anyway, my ego was on the line. I just started my $100 million project, and I didn't want to have anything upset about it. Because the previous week I was with Bill Levitt. Now that's Levittown, New York, and Levittown, Pennsylvania. So, my ego was there. I said, I want to think about this pretty heavy. But anyway, over the weekend, I sat in on meetings what they had planned for Jimmy Carter, what he had to do. And part of that was some of the things that Kissinger was mentioning, and that was, Kissinger said our number one problem on the planet is there's too many people. So Jimmy Carter had to put in writing, which he did, the Plan 2000, which calls for war to get started in the Middle East. That's all planned. If you go to the Georgia Guidestones on the internet, it gives you the same rundown. Anyway, that's one of the things. He had to give away the Panama Canal, which he did. A lot of these things were all in motion that they were going on. Anyway, I sat in on the meetings what they had planned on it, and that when the weekend was over, I told them no. Within 2 weeks, I was no longer one of the fair-haired guys. So, but at that same point, I had accumulated all the adult toys, so I wasn't too worried about anything. I'll just bother myself. I'm not going to say anything. At the same time, I built a house up in Aspen, and my housekeeper up there had a book called UFO Contact from the Pleiades. Incredible color photographs of exactly the same thing I saw at Edwards Air Force Base 25 years before. I'm sitting here, I didn't have anything better to do, but these pictures are real. I said, why doesn't the government come truth with all the information on UFOs? So I flew down to Phoenix and talked to this couple who had printed the book. And they say they were investigating a man in Switzerland who claimed to be in contact with beings from the star system, the Pleiades, who said that they engineered this planet for 500 million people. Well, part of Jimmy Carter's thing is to reduce the world's population back to 500 million. So I'm sitting here, wait a minute, I got information on two sides now, right? Mm-hmm. And when I'm sitting here looking at the book, and I'm talking to Lee and them, that's the guys in Phoenix, I said, I need to help you guys. I don't want to be involved in it, but I will finance the stuff. So what we did, I ended up in an agreement to finance the publishing of their book. I put money into their movie that was being made. And I said, you guys had to do what you want to, but when you get your money back out of these things, just give me my money back and forget me. I don't want anybody to know anything about it. Well, 90 days later, they sent me the accounting. They had received 3 times the amount I gave them, but there wasn't any check. I was really mad. So I got on the phone, and I talked to them, and I said, where's my money? And their response was, you don't need it. So I said, oh, okay. So at that time I was building, I had a Best Western restaurant in Phoenix, a Best Western motel I was building, and 3 village inns down there, and an office building on Central Avenue, an inverted pyramid. I built all that stuff. So my attorney's down there. I said, I'm going to go down there. We're going to file suit against them to recover my money, just because I don't think people should take things that they don't deliver to them. Well, while I'm down there, I'm getting more information. I said, we're just going to, unannounced, grab the next plane, and we did. And we ended off to Zurich, Switzerland, renting a car, and a 45-minute ride out of Zurich is Hinterschmidt Rudy, which Billy's at. And I'm knocking on the door, and a young lady answered the door. Her name is Rooney. And I said, I'm George Green. I put the money that's on your publishing your material, and the rest of it. I think Billy's story has to be told to the world, but I got some questions. And she looked at me, and I says, I need to talk to him. She says, he's not talking to anybody. I said, you go back and tell him who I am. Anyway, come back about 10 minutes later and said, Mr. Green, I'm sorry. Shirley MacLaine was here a couple months ago, and she promised to help, and nothing has happened. And I said, well, I guess there's nothing to do about it. My wife and I we're going to make a vacation out of this. I'll probably head off to Innsbruck, Austria the next day. So I said, where's the closest hotel? So I got it. We got in the hotel. Next morning, knocked on my door is Bruni, handed me a 2-page message signed by Quetzal. I have a copy of that message.
Quetzal being the contact.
The Pleiadian commander of the Pleiades.
Okay.
Of the group that came down there.
Right.
So all of a sudden, inviting us back to the compound my next week, everything I thought I knew is based on a lie somewhere. I mean, everything. Because I got to ask a lot of questions, got involved, and understood at that point, I made an agreement to publish their materials. But during that period of time when I was there, Billy showed me some other documents. One of them was he and a Greek priest were taken to a tomb wrapped in resin with the original writings of Judas Iscariot described to Christ. I'm looking at the documents, now to backtrack a little bit of my life. They were identical information that I basically got from Dr. Walter Moyer, who was dug up the Dead Sea Scrolls, telling me about the real life of Christ. Mm-hmm. When I was 14, well, they coincided with that. And I said, well, these are the original ones by Christ's scribe, because nobody they could read or write at that time anyway. I said, no, well, people should know about that. I said, my only problem with Billy, when I made the deal with Billy and the ETs, was, Billy, you gave away the worldwide rights to your story. So those people down in Phoenix who I'm suing. I said, we're going to have to get this thing taken care of. So what I said, I had no problems. At that time, I had a house in Beverly Hills, and my attorneys were the attorneys for Screen Actors Guild. I figured if anybody could break a contract, they could. So anyway, we flew back to Beverly Hills. I goes in to meet, it's Dern Mason and Flown, the firm. Anyway, I go in there, and they look at me. I said, I made a deal with you. I mean, they just laughed. I mean, I'm sitting here making a deal with extraterrestrials, right, to publish their material. And he didn't care. He wanted, my money's good. So anyway, he said, I'll take care of it. And he said, I'll let you know when we got something squared away. So 30 days later, roughly, he calls, he says, come on over to my office. So we did. And in the office, he says, I'm having a setup I have a judge willing to accept the case. But the judge, of course, you're going to have to get Billy over here to appear in front of our courts. Well, when I was Billy, he showed me pictures of California and San Francisco totally destroyed by a coming earthquake. And his comment was, we called him on the phone from Dern's office, and he says, I'm not leaving. I have 3 children and I'm safe here. So that little episode kind of put a stumbling block into the thing. So anyway, my wife and I got out. I had a little Mercedes convertible at that time, and we took off down towards the airport, and we had one of the Pleiadian beam ships follow us in broad daytime just to remind me that what was going on was real. I mean, I'm getting my head examined all different directions. So anyway, I figured out, when we got to the thing, I said, I'll have to figure out how this works out, and we'll let the extraterrestrials figure a way to get the information, and because I'm going to be their publisher of stuff. I didn't realize when I did that who I was involved with and how far this went, because I ended up being in contact with Emmanuel under his new name and ended up publishing his material. I end up, of course, being involved with the Pleiadians for a bit, but above the Pleiadians, there's a bigger group on them. And my agreement was to try to wake up people to what's going down. Now, of course, I sit in on our meetings what's planned by our government, or the guys within our government. Most of the government's asleep, for the reduction of the world's population. And then they asked me to do they wanted me to build an enemy prisoner of war camp. I have a copy of the contract in downtown Las Vegas. Now, that upset me because I'm looking at reading this thing. It says right on it, enemy. Well, you remember Ted Gunderson. He was a friend of mine, and I helped finance Ted, too.
Right.
Anyway, Ted, well, you went out with me, I guess, one day. With Ted took the contract, come back, and he said they're building them all over the country, only they call them FEMA camps now.
Right.
Now, Ted was the former head of the FBI for Southern California, as you know, and he investigated a lot of stuff. He was with Oswald and Ferry. He was there to protect them. They had nothing to do with the killing of Kennedy. So really fascinating on how this thing worked out. So I got exposed a lot of new ways.
Right. And Gunderson was killed. Actually, he died of cancer.
That's right.
Yeah. And suspicious circumstances really around that.
Well, the truth is, 6 months before that, Ted and I were having lunch. I don't know if you were invited over, it was something about he was totally healthy and everything. All of this came down to him just instantly.
Same thing happened to Brian O'Leary.
Brian O'Leary, as you know,
Brian.
I helped finance Brian the same way. Brian O'Leary was an Apollo astronaut who was involved with that stuff, and he was involved. He is Buzz Aldrin with his buddy in the thing on it. Now Brian and I went out and lectured to come around because he was concerned about the planet Earth, and I published his book, Re-Inheriting the Earth.
Right.
In order to get there, and he was concerned. Meanwhile, I'm same position. He got involved with some of the things that we've been told, like going to the moon. We never went to the moon. It's a movie script. It's great, but people don't believe that, but we can verify it now. They're coming out with a lot of that stuff. Meanwhile, what do you do with all this information? Well, the ETs contacted me, again, this is a few years ago, and said, you're running out of time on the planet, and you've agreed to help us get it out. So I ended up publishing a book, and the first in a series, and it's called The Handbook for the New Paradigm,
yes,
which I have one right here, just to give you an idea.
Sleight of hand. Okay, yeah.
This one, for anybody that wants a copy of it, because you got to read it. It's not an easy read. It's to awaken you to what's going on.
I think it's a pretty easy read.
Well, you go to my website, nohoax.com, and you can download it. If you have to have a hard copy.
I recommend it, yes, absolutely.
Anyway, there's
all 4 books.
Well, 3 is what I put out there. I don't want to give the 4th book out until they've read the 3.
I understand.
Because we're re-educating you on everything on the planet from the extraterrestrials. As they can't interfere with this. This is our game we're playing. You know what they tell me on the whole thing on it?
Yes.
On this planet, everybody thinks they're passengers on this planet. Everybody's on for a ride. The truth is, I want everybody part of the crew to clean it all up.
Yeah.
So that's the game I'm looking at. How do we get the crew back? And that begins with the Handbook for the New Paradigm and its sequels, which are available free at nohoax.com.
Yeah, excellent. And you've been doing this, you've been out now on the circuit really talking about this for many, many years.
Yeah, I have.
So let's fast forward to today. And, you've been through a lot. In and out of trouble and getting stuff out there, right, to the best of your ability.
Correct.
And you've had ET contact steadily,
That's
right,
correct.
through these years.
That's right.
And you've also been dealing with banking and trying to help presidents of countries as well.
Country, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm dealing with the financial system on a world basis.
Right.
So I met with the presidents of all of Latin America. I bought at one of my coffee farms for Rodrigo Odio, the president of Costa Rica.
Right.
And so he introduced me to all the presidents. We had a special. I was the only American there.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't in politics. And politics is 2 words, right? Poly means many, and ticks are bloodsuckers. So, to give you an idea.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the ETs are now preparing me for a lot of stuff because within days right now we're looking at probably the West Coast going. That was some of the pictures that I saw with him. We're going to have the earthquake begin. Yesterday or 2 days ago, I had friends in. They'd call me. They're in contact also, and they're putting on some dates right now for. Remember, there was 200 miles of Ecuador just wiped out this last year.
Right.
Anyway, that's today even there's still more earthquakes, and that's going to go all the way up to the West Coast. And we're going to have that all happen in this time period over the next 2 months. They say by November.
Okay.
So I think that's going to.
So that's the information you're getting.
Right.
All right. And you have gotten information in the past that hasn't happened, right?
I got information, but the time wasn't wrong.
Right.
Like the Plan 2000 that Carter put in. That was supposed to be done by the year 2000. That was the idea of getting Iraq going.
Right.
It wasn't for oil. It was to get World War III started. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things they've given me, but the sequence of events have not. It's still happening, but it's either behind schedule or whatever. That's what I look at.
All right. Okay. So with the financial reset, which you must be aware of, right?
Yep.
What are you hearing is going to be, because I was talking to you off camera about somebody had told me that U.S. was going on a silver standard. And you think no? Huh?
No, it's not going to do that. I was in meetings on that. They're going to go 100% to the debit card, and that meeting that's all spelled out on the FEMA rules. And then what you're going to do is go to the post office and register and get your new ID. That'll be a government ID, so they can keep track of everything. Now, the reason is 94% of all money today in the United States is digits. In other words, everybody's all used to it. You don't go anywhere without having a credit card. I mean, you can't go to the supermarket or anything else. They give it to it. So there's no money there at all. It's just digits that's setting up. So people are used to it. But meanwhile, they got this other thing they're still looking at. That's population control and everything else. So the game is on. How do we get everybody in here? We got to have some kind of national emergency which suspends the Constitution. And if they do that, we will not have an election this year.
Okay. And what do you think the odds of that happening are?
I think it's pretty heavy because Trump's a wild card. He had his own money doing this thing, and Trump. The only problem that Trump has right now, Washington. It's like when I flew back to Washington with my friends. If you got elected and you went to Washington D.C., you can't bring your staff with them. You have to use the existing staff that's out there for that particular party. So what you have in here, you just got talking figureheads of whatever the group is. And if you go back there, you see most of them go on vacation all the time, and they really don't get anything done, especially during the last 8 years. I mean, you're looking at Harry Reid out there at the head of the deal. Have they passed anything? Of course, Harry was all involved with all of the black budgets and everything else, too, because he was help laundering all the money for all the drug centers.
Okay. But if you look at the situation that we've been through the last 8 years, you're saying they've been on vacation. What do you mean? You're talking about Obama and his crew?
Yeah, they haven't put any real past any laws on it.
Okay, but Bush Sr. is really in charge, isn't he?
At this point, the Bush family, lineage-wise, could be, but I think at this minute, when you get up to the top up there, the group meetings that they have on overseas are the ones that are telling him what to do. They always have a figurehead.
Sure.
It's like when I talked to him, the head of the Fed, I said he's the most powerful man in the world, and he said I'm just a front man. That's the same thing with the Congress. And the presidents are all front men.
Yeah, of course.
But the Bushes happen to have a bloodline in the drug industry, as you well know. I'm not talking about the bad stuff. I mean, the head of the CIA is bringing in drugs.
Sure.
So you got all this stuff.
Well, but that's the project money.
Exactly.
That's been funding basically what we call the secret space program.
Exactly. All the stuff, the secret on the side and whatever. But meanwhile, we have an age problem that's going on within the Bushes. And within the hierarchy, it's kind of, some of these people that got the books and stuff that we have, they're all getting up in their 80s and 90s. Will they survive? If they want them to, they will, because they're not real anymore. That's another story to go into.
Well, clones.
Clones.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I'm curious about one thing with clones. And we know they've been doing the clones for a long time. In fact, Russia, there was documentation, there was an island up off the coast of Russia that they were using, and so on. Do you know how long a clone lasts? Do you have up-to-date information on that?
Well, the last a friend of mine was one of the doctors on the clones.
All right.
And she's dead now too. She was a lady doctor, but she worked at Bethesda. They also do it at, they have a wing, they have a separate building at Bethesda that handles the clones. Anyway, it's no problem on them. The trouble is the clones break down under stress. So depending on the stress level, how quick they have to replace them. So it may be clone 3, 4, or 5, we don't know.
Okay.
So at that point. And they don't live simultaneously. Maybe their intelligence was out. I mean, if people really look at young George when he came in office and look at the ones when he came out of office and look at him today on their videos, it's not the same George.
Yeah, for sure.
So you can look at it, but when they don't have any souls, they don't really have any energy.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Okay, what are you hearing about, though, the Brexit thing and all of this? Do you think that this is just a show?
Oh, this is a show to get the whole Middle East all set up here, and also breakdown of all the countries. The information I have right now, the next country that's going to go out is France. And then they're going to be followed by Spain. And this is.
But what about the false flags that are happening right now to sort of corral France into getting back in line?
That's the whole game on everybody saying that we're doing what we can to get everybody supplied. Well, who's controlling all the money again? It all comes back from what?
Was Rothschild? I mean, we're going above Rothschild?
With the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland again, which has always been protected. Now, who runs all of that? Now you're back to the cartel.
Right.
Or one of the secret societies on it. I mean, we said people in the States, we have a party every year because of all the billionaires, but that's just peanuts to them out there right now.
What do you mean a party
They have a meeting of all the billionaires over in Wyoming,
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. It's a different deal. But when you come back to the other meetings that are going on, like you say, the Bilderbergers, and which just had a meeting too.
Yes.
These people are all heads of big companies and everything. You have to understand, they're trying to look at an overall basis, think we're going to keep people going and working and all that to keep ourselves in. But they pay themselves first. They take care of themselves. Now they run pretty much under secrecy. They do it within the group, but it always spills out. As you see, you've been looking and finding out, and you run across. There's people say, okay, but the next problem with all that is how are we going to change it? And that's the reason I come back with the ETs, and they say we'll assist you to wake up to who and what you really are. That's the basis of the books. And if you wake up, and there's a little prayer that they give you. I am a human becoming. Help me become. That gives them permission to communicate with you directly. Now, if the books, you can't read them, you're probably not going to be one. You're going to be one on the wheel of reincarnation to come back to this planet again.
Sure.
Well, it's graduation time for the planet and everything. So the planet's going to go through major geophysical changes from now on. High winds, 300 to 400 miles an hour on the surface. I mean, all this stuff can be documented like I did at the World Watch Association, 5 blocks north of the White House.
Okay, do you think that this scenario of alternative 3, alternative 4, and what they're talking about, I think they've got something called alternative 21, if I think, heard that. You hear in any of the stuff to do with all this going off planet, because we've got bases on the moon and Mars, this, right? You've got a
We
very
have them on
substantial.
there, but we have too much of a population left on the planet. And one of the things, you may have gone that far, but we don't have the ability. We have the ability to, along with the ETs, to go to other planets.
Yeah.
So there's a group of ETs that has been favoring certain people. You go down to Dulce, New Mexico. There's a whole base down there. It's the ETs, and
yes.
Dulce was originally set up to handle all our nuclear waste underground. You realize the United States is the only place that has all the nuclear waste and it's above ground? Did you know that? All that waste is affecting all this. My son was in charge for a bit of the Nevada thing where they were going to take all the waste and put it in the mountain up there. They canceled all that. Now he's over in, my son's in Indonesia right now.
Right.
With the big ones. So they keep changing all this stuff. So I'm a little afraid about that. Meanwhile, we've affected everybody's thought processes everywhere because of the cell phones and all the towers on this at a certain frequency deal.
Right.
And then in school, we don't teach history anymore. History is his story, always written by the victor.
Yes, of course.
So you're sitting here at the point now, how do we get people educated? First rule in the universe, gain all knowledge. Well, they do that by listening to Carrie, plus all of your other guests that are here. And I really appreciate you doing that, getting people out there so they start to think. They are responsible. I'm not going to do it for them.
Right.
You're not going to do it for them. But you've got this thing to go out here, try to trigger the awakening process to get them so we can go to the next step. To me, there's going to be little groups left. And I want to be you part of the group and your listeners part of the group too. And the instruction manuals are all built into the books that I'm giving away free.
Okay, now what about in terms of, we were told, for example, by Simon Parks, that they're actually planning to do this reset and to take possession of people's accounts very soon. And he said that when the reset comes through, they are going to devalue like the dollar or whatever you have in your account. I don't know if it, I guess it also goes, he has a warning on one of my videos I'm gonna put out very soon. Anyway, have you heard anything about this?
Sure.
Yeah?
The only thing I haven't got is the value that they're going to place on it. They are already taking, what they're doing as a gold trader, I'm 5 blocks from the mint so I can get gold and silver. One of the things is what they're doing down, the other dealers across the country that are offering this stuff, they're shutting their accounts down right now, so they don't have any bank account. So they can't buy or sell whatever they have, and if they had any cash for somebody, it's like Northwest Mint out.
Because they know that they're going to attack the accounts.
Exactly, and so that way you think you're secure because you've given this guy gold or something someplace else. They're all shut down. How are you going to get access to your money? So what I'm telling everybody, I have the accounting book. Again, I'll send a copy of that page that shows you what the only thing that they recognize, and that's gold. Silver is our game out here, and it has all kinds of uses, pharmaceutical-wise and everything else. So that's what I'm looking at. But they can't use there's not enough silver to cover. This is a world thing. China now has issued a new currency backed by gold, but you can't use dollars to buy it. And if you look at the dollar account, and I don't know how you count them, frankly, we're over 100 trillion in debt. Well, nobody knows what a billion even is. You know what a billion is? A $10,000, $100,000 homes. Now you multiply a billion times a billion, all of a sudden you're up to what? That's what trillion.
Yeah.
And we're over 100 trillion, and there's no assets behind that. Mm-hmm. It's all paper, and that's most of people's pension funds. Social Security is bankrupt. The wild card in all this is inflation. Inflation is going, you give me a figure. You know, how much a year? 7%, 10% a year? What do you think? It costs 10% more to buy something than it did last year? The banker's rule of 72 is divide the interest rate or inflation rate into 72. It'll take you how long it takes to double your money or cut the purchasing. In other words, if you got 10%, it takes 7.2 years before your dollar's worth 50 cents. That means, and insurance companies, they rely on this because they give you long-term money at 2.5% when held to maturity. There's no way you can win.
Absolutely. Now, for the average person out there who doesn't, play with those games, they've just got a bank account, they're living, I guess, month to month. What is the solution for them?
Their only solution is I'm advising everybody to get at least 1 or 2 months in small bills, 1s, 5s, 10s, and 20s, because when this collapses, this thing all seals down, we're still going to have an exchange that's going on. Banks right now are going to be calling in all $100 bills. Right now you can still get 50s. You usually can't use too many $100 bills out of this country, as a matter of fact. Most of them won't take them anymore because they're getting ready to shut those all down. I mean, I've got a friend with a lot of those, and meanwhile, if you come in with over, depending on the bank, $3,000 to $5,000 in $100 bills, to deposit them even, they're going to ask where you got them, and they report it to the Internal Revenue Service. So this is a real game. They come and stick it to look at who's got all this money. We want to get it converted. So I have to figure out and there are ways to protect themselves, and I try to do that, but I do that on an individual basis when they contact me. So they can email me if I
Okay,
contact
so you want to tell them where to reach you?
Just email global@nohoax.com, and you want to talk about whatever you want. Most people want to talk about their billfold anyway first, and then we can talk about all the other ones. I'm concerned about their soul and the next step, but when it comes to money, I'm really a professor at that. I know I've done it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a short interview. There's not a lot of time, and you've got to speak in the morning, so I don't want to take too much of your energy here. But I think you covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time here. There are interviews with George, other interviews I've done, and you got your books that are available. I recommend those. And any last words you want to say to the public here? Any ideas that give them how to greet if we've got earth changes in the future? That's a high likelihood. They're not necessarily natural either, let me say that. I don't know how you feel about a man-made EMP. Have you been hearing anything like that?
Well, they're doing all kinds of experiments on all of this stuff because they want to try to manipulate it. They started to control the weather over in India, for instance, and the guy was selling that. And then they stopped him from doing that because they could control the weather. Right now, because when we started exploding nuclear bombs out of New Mexico, they did it in the higher atmosphere. And when I got the details, I was talking to the guys that were doing it. I mean, they're dead now too, but they said the biggest problem is we exploded some nuclear weapons that put a band 4 miles thick around the planet of radiation, has eaten holes through the ozone layer, which is killing off 1,000 life forms a day. So if I'm looking at what's going on, there's no reason why, when I was in Panama, the ocean's 5 degrees warmer, why both poles are melting now, because we're doing it to ourselves. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's part of it. So now I've got these other things to look at. If we're going to do that, how do we get the right food? Because food is engineered at this minute. We got a lot of genetically modified stuff that's going on, and like in California, they raise carrots, as you know. It's a big crop for doing all things, but it's used to clean the cotton crops. So the cotton crops are all sprayed with all of the poisons and everything. And so once a year, they take the cotton down and plant carrots. And what do the carrots got? All the poisons.
Right.
And what do you do that? Carrots from California, you better believe they're in big trouble.
Oh, wow.
I'm just telling you. But every little thing has been studied for that point. Now, heavily, and right now my sources are saying get ready for major geophysical changes. And again, their instructions are get together in small towns away from this is part of the 4th book that I have called Messages to the Ground Crew. And you want to read the other 3 books, and if you read the other 3 books, you'll be educated enough, because the first rule is to gain all knowledge. You're going to have enough to what's coming down. Now, locals will tell you certain things that they run into. I'm serious, because the guy is going to find out it's all a lie. He's like, one of my friends was an executioner. I wouldn't say friend, associate, for the CIA. Killed 120-some people for the CIA.
Talking about Chip Tatum?
No.
Another guy.
Oh, yeah, I got all the lists. I'll show it to you
right.
So you can look at some of these names. You won't believe it. I mean,
right.
the 3 of the shooters, he took out 3 of them because they got paid $50,000 apiece, and they were bragging about it. And I have their names and the dates and everything that had happened.
Right.
I agree. He shared it all with me because what happens is the guys up there decided they're going to get rid of him. So he said, I'll fix your wagon. So he sent over the documents over to Europe, and I got copies of them and said, if something happens to me, you can go ahead and publish them. So it's amazing.
So what about this guy named John Coleman? Because didn't you publish his books?
Yes, John Coleman was MI6.
Right.
But that's not his real name.
I believe that.
Well, when he came to me, he was living in right next to a feedlot up in Northern California, and sent me the information on the Committee of 300, and I said, I know this is real because, it was sitting down there. So I agreed to act as a publisher for him. So I published his book, that one, One World Order and Diplomacy by Deception, which are basically good, but they're 20 years old now.
Yeah, but they're accurate, right?
Sure. Oh, the information in there. Well, I still have them, and they're still available.
What about the Economic Hitman?
I didn't do anything.
You never knew Did you ever read his book or know about what he does?
Yeah.
Yeah. Pretty accurate.
Yeah, they're pretty. A lot of these, they come out with them, and it's the same problem we have. We can get all say, hey, he did it. Now, what's that going to do?
Yeah.
Each one of us have a different job and a different spirit. This Rent-A-Wreck containing your 22 grams, so that's what your soul weighs.
All right.
And it's connected to your soul. People who get a heart transplant, the soul goes with it. So new people change their personalities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think sometimes it's temporary though. Okay, so where are we going at this moment? You know, do you have any, you know, because you've been, like I said, in this game a very long time. You're looking at a possible, basically, you know, the government may
Call
say
a national
that it's,
emergency, yeah.
you know, what did they say, continuity of government, taking,
Here's
what's going to be
here's the law right now. If he calls a national emergency, for 30 days he maintains the presidency. After the 30 days, the head of the United Nations takes it over.
And that's bad news.
Hey, end of story.
Yeah.
Who's running the UN now?
Isn't that, who is that now? The head of the United Nations?
I don't know who it is today.
Forget who it
but
is.
I just remember
It's
who's
not Ban
controlling
Ki-moon,
him.
is it?
Yeah, no, it goes to a game and we're aging. And the trouble is, we're aging the population pretty big time right now because
Right.
we're allowing people to live. And all of a sudden now we have a consumer society of people that are not producing anything. You know, 40% of our income now is doing that. That's people on retirement or whatever.
Well, I mean, also the Nazis learned how to reverse age people, so we got a lot of Nazis running around that look a lot younger,
Well,
and they're still with us.
it's just, theoretically, the Pleiadians lived to be 1,000 years old.
Yeah,
We have the DNA within it's been re-engineered, so that isn't the average life. They look like it, and if they live and they look too young, they're probably cloned. It's like, I get away looking, I was born in the 30s, and yet I look very young.
yeah,
I look at that, but that just happened to be the genetics of the DNA that
The
I
good
have within
stuff,
my
yeah.
family. So I look at that, and they say, "Oh, I've got guys that'll make it so you live to be 130." I don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 years. This is going to be challenging.
Yeah.
At least I've got myself several escape places where I can go when everything starts falling apart. Everything. I have friends that in free energy. I have friends that in medical knows all the medical stuff, and all these things are going together. So yeah, I'll be able to survive. The same question is for what and how. How are we going to change the planet?
Sure.
And then my ETs are telling me there's a possibility we may not make it. Well, I'm still gambling. I can get enough people to change it. So that's where I'm at.
okay, well, good to hear it. Okay, you know, thanks very much, George Green, for your service to humanity, and for everyone, thanks for listening, and let's have a great conference this weekend, and, you know, onward and upward, so to speak, all right?
Hey, upward and onward. You got it.